Hello, my dear friends. Today, I will tell you a mysterious story about a Riki, the dynasty of shadows. Part 1, the House of Talon. The world of Dota is ruled by power, raw, elemental, and as shifting as the tides of magic that thread through its lands. Among the legendary realms and ancestral keeps that dotted the old continent, none shone more brightly than the dynasty of Talon. Its banners fluttered from mountain passes to the emerald banks of the river Cassian, a regal blue and silver sigil, the stylized mask, half shadow and half sun, upon a field of stars. In the heart of its dominion stood the City of Lights, a city that never truly slept, watched over by enchantments that made its marble towers glow with a gentle radiance through even the darkest nights. It was said that in Talon's high halls, wisdom and strength walked hand in hand. But shadows gather even under the purest light, and every dynasty is built not only on stone and steel, but on the ambitions and secrets of those who call it home. The citadel and its lords. The citadel of Talon rose above the city like a crown, its walls smooth and pale as bone, veined with streaks of silver runestone. Within those ramparts sprawled winding gardens scented with night-blooming flowers, courtyards where mages from distant lands debated under hovering lanterns of witchlight, and great colonnaded halls where the ruling family held court. The lord of this dynasty was High Sovereign Elen, a figure as imposing as he was enigmatic. His beard, thick and silver-threaded, framed a face weathered by decades of rule. His eyes, dark as riverstone, missed nothing. He wore his authority lightly at times, delighting in the council of scholars and generals, listening to the chimes and lutes of traveling minstrels. But beneath his generous manner throbbed a will of iron. 3 sons were born to Elen. Each carried a fragment of his legacy, though none bore it in equal measure. The eldest, Veilen, the firstborn and heir apparent, walked with the assurance of one who'd been groomed for greatness since infancy. He cut a handsome figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of storm clouds, kept immaculately pulled back in a warrior's knot. His eyes, sharp, almost hawkish, missed little in court or on the training fields. Veilen had been steeped in statecraft from childhood. He argued with statesmen before he could ride a horse alone, attended war councils at his father's side, and memorized treaties as if they were lines to a cherished song. He savored power not for its own sake, but for what it could command: loyalty, order, fear. And yet, even as his father tested him with responsibility, granting him command over tax levies or border fortifications, Veilen's hunger only sharpened. He relished decisive action and bristled at delay. He scorned the weakness of doubt. To his advisor's caution, he answered with curt dismissal. To his brothers, he offered little. To the youngest, a tolerant amusement. To the middle son, Riki, a faint curl of disdain. The youngest, Cassian, youngest by nearly 10 years and beloved by all who met him. Where Veilen moved with rigid purpose, Cassian drifted through life on gentle currents, dark-eyed, quick to laughter, a perpetual guest at parties and revels. The city's courtesans adored him, poets praised his wit, vintners sent him their rarest casks. He had no taste for politics nor for war. The rituals of state bored him. The sword calloused his hands and ruined his manicures. Why dwell on duty when life's pleasures called from every corner? Cassian's greatest strength was his charm, and perhaps his greatest weakness, too. Of all three sons, Cassian basked most easily in their parents' affections. Elen tolerated his youngest's playfulness. Let him be young while youth lasts, while their mother spoiled him with silks sent from the east and rare honeyed fruits from the southern coasts. The forgotten middle, Riki. In every legend, there is one who stands in shadow, a place not always chosen, but often inevitable. The middle son, Riki, was born into this twilight, not firstborn nor favored, not youngest nor indulged. He was quiet even as a child, with hair dark as midnight and eyes like polished obsidian, solemn, unblinking. He lingered at the edges of banquets, watched tournaments unseen from high balconies, sat alone in gardens as dusk fell and fireflies danced among whispering reeds. If anyone noticed his absence from family gatherings or celebrations, they rarely commented. Riki's mind was sharp, but not in ways that earned open praise. While Veilen debated law and history with their tutors and Cassian entertained guests with lute and song, Riki slipped away to watch soldiers drill in the squares below or lose himself in the vaults of the family library. There he devoured treatises on warfare, old texts penned by ancient tacticians, scrolls scrawled in hurried inks about knife techniques and battlefield smoke. The knowledge excited him in ways court intrigue never could. Yet theory was only a shadow of practice, and so it was that Riki came to desire more than books could offer: a night at court. One evening, the kind when the city's lanterns shimmered against a violet sky, the family gathered for a feast honoring some minor victory over bandit hosts at Talon's border. Tapestries hung heavy with gold thread. The table groaned beneath platters of roasted fowl glazed in wild honey, and carafes brimming with mulberry wine enchanted to never run dry. Veilen sat at his father's right hand, discussing reparations for captured villages in clipped tones. Cassian lounged 2 seats away, idly teasing a string of pearls from a serving girl while regaling her with tales of invisible spirits said to haunt the cellars beneath their feet. Riki found himself midway between them, close enough for courtesy, too distant for comfort. He picked at his food distractedly, watching Veilen's gestures, the confident way he pointed out cities on a map spread between goblets, how easily courtiers deferred to him. Cassian's laughter rippled over bites of candied ginger. Riki's thoughts drifted to the silent barracks beyond those thick stone walls, to the idea that somewhere out there men risked all on blade and cunning, while he sat here polishing etiquette. He did not notice when Veilen's gaze fell upon him, sharp and faintly mocking. "Tell us," Veilen said suddenly, pinning Riki with a smile that carried little warmth. "What would you do with bandits harrying our merchants along the Caen?" Several heads turned, Elen inclining his head curiously. Riki hesitated only a moment before replying quietly, "I would send scouts ahead, not along main roads, but through the woods beside them. I'd have them listen for rumors among river folk. Strike where they least expect it." Veilen arched an eyebrow. "And if your scouts are caught, tortured for information, or worse?" Riki met his brother's stare without flinching. "Then I would ensure my scouts know how to disappear." Veilen chuckled, a short sound almost lost amid clinking glasses. "Disappear? We are not burglars or shadow dancers," he said dryly. "We wage war openly." "Our enemies do not," Riki replied softly. "If we cannot match them, move for move, eventually they will teach us how." A ripple passed through the company. Not laughter exactly, but something close to it. Amusement, mixed with surprise at this quiet son's unorthodox views. Only Elen seemed thoughtful. You have an eye for strategy, their father mused at last. But more is needed than cleverness in war. Yes, Veilen interjected smoothly, resolve is what wins battles and nations. Cassian lifted his cup lazily. May we never run out of either, or wine. The conversation turned then to other matters. A new shipment from far-off New Bloom. Rumors from Oskavosh about ancient spirit stirring. But Riki heard little else that night. He felt keenly his place, a voice neither dismissed outright nor truly welcomed. The dreaming city. Night deepened over Talon as feasting gave way to revelry below. Music rising from alleys where illusionists conjured flickering animals out of colored smoke. Lovers wandering beneath enchanted arches heavy with moon blossom. Guildsmen gambling fortunes in taverns lit by stones that pulsed with faint magical glow. Here, magic was woven into daily life, a gentle undercurrent rippling through streets and palaces alike. Lanterns floated unaided along great boulevards, tiny flames harnessed within crystal baubles by apprentice arcanists from the Tower College on Farwatch Hill. Sentinels patrolled beyond the outer walls, wielding halberds tipped with rune iron, a metal that hummed when danger approached. There were whispered tales, not always in jest, that some Talon guards bore more exotic gifts. Rings enchanted to cloak their wearers in shadow, or boots that silenced footfalls entirely. Yet for all these wonders, and for all the might at its command, the dynasty was not immune to envy or ambition. Of power and hunger, Veilen felt it most keenly, that gnawing dissatisfaction that comes to those who stand nearest greatness but are denied its full measure. In shadowed council rooms, he watched his father preside with effortless authority, settling disputes between merchant guilds or dismissing generals who'd failed their charge. He saw himself reflected, distorted, in every act. A mirror, showing both promise and limitation. Veilen's private study was lined with maps, stained by candle wax, and redrawn borders traced again and again, as if by sheer will he might shape destiny itself. He read histories of warlords who shattered empires by daring what others would not, studied ancient grimoires detailing pacts struck at midnight crossroads. Sometimes he would linger late into night by the great windows overlooking Talon's sleeping sprawl, gazing past shimmering domes toward unseen threats beyond the walls, rival dynasties nursing old grudges, assassins rumored to haunt alleyways even here in the heart of power. He promised himself, as often as necessary, that when his time came, there would be no hesitation. Advisors could counsel patience until their tongues dried up. Veilen would seize what was owed him by birthright and cunning both. He did not notice how obsession hollowed out what once had been impatience, as thirst becomes fever when left unchecked beneath an unyielding sun. The youngest drifts. Cassian moved through these pressures like water sliding past rocks, untouched by currents swirling below. He wound up each day in new company, once joining mages debating rune theory over honeyed mead, though he remembered nothing. Another night, slipping through velvet-curtained parlors with jewel-eyed dancers whose names blurred together by dawn. He knew little of responsibility, save what could be shrugged off after breakfast or drowned in laughter. His mother doted on him still, her only complaint being that he returned home too seldom, and then only with some new creature, a white-furred fox he'd rescued from an alchemist's cage or rare bird singing songs no one else could hear. Cassian was content, and contentment rarely notices peril until it is much too late. Riki, inward gaze. For Riki, loneliness wore many faces, but he wore it lightly now. In moments snatched amid household routine, he trained alone, in hidden courtyards or atop moonlit parapets where none disturbed him save drifting owls or silent bats wheeling overhead. His solace was observation, how shadows stretched long across flagstones before dawn broke, how a single guard's armor glinted differently when he thought himself unwatched, how shouts from distant barracks echoed strange patterns when wind shifted just so. He learned to listen not only to words, but to silences, the things unsaid in council chambers or behind closed doors. If envy pricked him when Veilen held forth before generals or Cassian spun tales among sweet-voiced courtesans, he did not show it outwardly. Instead, he wondered how such gifts might be turned toward other purposes, how one might move unseen where others clamored for attention, strike without warning, then vanish without trace. In dreams, he saw himself neither prince nor pawn, but something altogether other, a wraith slipping between worlds just out of reach. The shadow beckons. One autumn dusk found Riki standing at the edge of Talon's ancient arena, a structure half carved from a living rock, half built anew each century by masons whose names were lost to time. From high above, he watched as two armored warriors circled each other, one wielding twin blades that flashed like lightning, the other cloaked in gray veils that seemed to melt into air itself between attacks. Crowds surged around them, cries mingling with cheers as steel met steel again and again, but Riki cared less for spectacle than for technique. How one combatant fainted left, then vanished behind smoke conjured from a small vial hooked at his belt. How another used a feigned stumble to deliver a killing blow unseen by all but those who truly watched. Riki lingered long after dusk bled into night, studying every move until the last torch guttered out and silence claimed the empty seats once more. He resolved then, more certainly than ever before, that what he craved was mastery not only over blade but over all that hid beneath surface appearances, stealth, deception, the art of being present only when one wished it so. In that moment, something shifted inside him, a resolve forged not from duty nor desire for power, but from longing to be seen on his own terms. He would no longer wait to be chosen. He would choose himself, even if it meant stepping fully into shadow to do so. End of Part 1. The Dynasty of Shadows. Part 2. Whispers in the marble halls. The city of lights shimmered at dusk, when lanterns burst into golden bloom along bridges and archways, and the last sunbeams cast banners of blue-silver into molten strands. In the high colonnades of Talon's citadel, the world narrowed to marble, shadow, and echo. The echo of footfalls, the echo of names. For Riki, second son, these were the hours of questions without answers. As his brothers moved through their roles, Veilen at the training yards, Cassian drifting from feasts to music rooms, he lingered where attention was thin and doors hung half open. His place in the dynasty was neither defined by birthright nor colored with expectation. He was present and yet barely seen, a silent watcher. It was during one such twilight, as servants extinguished incense in the family shrine, that Riki first lingered by the tall western windows overlooking the central arena. He pressed his fingers to cold glass, watching the swirl of dust as pages scurried, setting up for the morrow's tournament. Already, warriors in lacquered armor, some bearing crests from distant city-states, began their silent rituals, oiling blades, whispering prayers to spirits of war. Riki knew these forms by heart. He'd long since learned to read the language of swordplay, not from tutors or drills, but from observation. How a fighter's stance betrayed intent, how a faint tremor in grip revealed nerves. Unremarked upon by his family, he became the citadel's silent watcher. That evening, Riki slipped out, his absence likelier noted by the kitchen cat than any kin, and found himself among the stone benches below. The arena was still empty, but he circled its fringes, testing his own shadow in every patch of torchlight. The echoes here were not only voices, but memories. The ghost of his father's laughter at a youthful contest. Veilen's voice raised in victory. Cassian's applause as insubstantial as fairy dust. It was here he first dared to imagine that meaning might be found outside others' gaze. Brothers among crowds. The days that followed marked the Feast of Harvest, a time when Talon opened its gates to merchant caravans and envoys. The city's avenues swelled with trade and rumor. Knights paraded with fluttering pennants, and children chased after masked jesters through flower-strewn arcades. Veilen, always drawn to spectacle, basked at the center. He strode with a retinue of admirers, young officers eager for approval, minor nobles bearing gifts, and gossip. Riki watched him from afar, noting how Veilen's laughter could silence dissent or cast a spell over any gathering. Yet behind that brilliance lay impatience, a hunger for challenge barely sated by ceremony. Cassian moved differently, slipping between crowds like a painter seeking new colors. He gathered stories as others gathered coins, coaxing secrets from travelers and enchanting guards with riddles. Where Veilen commanded loyalty through strength, Cassian collected affection through charm. Riki's own presence was neither command nor invitation. He drifted at the margins, a shadow in sunlit halls. One evening, after a particularly raucous banquet in honor of northern emissaries, Riki found himself in the shadow of an ivy-draped stairwell. Above, laughter rang out, the unmistakable cadence of his brothers' voices. "He's at it again," Cassian said, amusement bright beneath his words. "Our dear ghost. I saw him watching Lord Veilen spar today. He seemed hungry." Veilen snorted. "Let him watch. Mayhap he'll learn something of use, or perhaps he merely wishes to count our missteps so he can sell them for coin. Not everyone seeks glory by standing atop a pyre," Cassian replied softly. Riki pressed himself against stone until their voices faded. He stole away into the gardens, letting dew soak through his boots and quietly resenting how, even in private conversation, he was an object, a curiosity, rather than a brother. Yet, in their dismissal, there flickered a strange freedom. He was neither accounted for nor constrained, a blade in the margins. That night, beneath the pearlescent light of twin moons, Riki returned to the arena alone. The stands were deserted. Only banners whispered along empty railings. He slipped into the practice pen, a place usually reserved for elite guards at dawn, and knelt beside a rack of battered training blades. He selected one at random, notched steel with a leather hilt worn smooth by dozens of hands. It felt wrong at first, awkward compared to finely balanced showpieces, but that awkwardness demanded adaptation rather than rote memory. Riki mimicked what he'd observed, the poised stance of Lord Veilen, the spinning feint favored by Veilen, even Cassian's nimble dodges when evading an overeager dance partner. He moved through each motion slowly at first, then with increasing fluency, turning mimicry into something personal. As dawn crept over marble parapets, Riki finished his self-imposed lesson, sheeted in sweat and silence. He stowed the blade carefully and vanished before servants arrived to sweep away last night's revels. The Library of Forgotten Wars. In Talon's east wing stood a library seldom visited by anyone save scholars or bored scribes, a sanctuary thick with vellum dust and the scent of dried ink. Here, tucked between treatises on runic law and treatises on genealogy, Riki discovered his second teacher, parchment. He pored over military histories, the siege of Feldspire Fort, the ambush at Ember Vale, legends of stone-masked warriors who moved like smoke and left no trace but myth. He devoured diagrams, how to slip a dagger between armor plates where shadows pooled on a moonless night, what poisons left no mark even under scrutiny from priests of purest thunderwrath. He copied passages onto scraps pilfered from disused ledgers and mapped imaginary battles on blank stretches of tabletop. Sometimes he practiced footwork between rows of sleeping scrolls, moving without stirring dust or tipping candle stubs. Time stretched oddly in those vaults. An hour became 2. Evening bled into dawn without notice. Occasionally, a librarian might peer over rimmed spectacles, ready to shoo away an interloper. But Riki had mastered vanishing between shelves almost as well as any page-turning ghost story told among apprentices. A chance encounter. On one afternoon, heavy with rain, when even Veilen abandoned training courts for wine and Cassian plucked his lute beside guttering hearths, Riki found himself alone among racks of chipped shields and dulled pole arms near the armory's lower vaults. He examined each weapon methodically, weighed them in hand, traced runes along blades that once belonged to border sentinels, attempted balances and parries against empty air. Unbeknownst to him, Lord Elen entered behind heavy doors. The High Sovereign paused, not out of suspicion, but simple curiosity, and observed his son's solitary diligence. After some time had passed, Elen cleared his throat. "Better to sharpen your mind before you sharpen steel," he intoned gravely, "or you may win battles only to lose kingdoms." Riki straightened quickly. "Yes, father." Elen regarded him, a gaze neither warm nor cold, but implacable as mountain stone. "You spend much time alone," Riki dared to reply. "There is much to learn where others do not look." A faint smile shadowed Elion's lips. "And yet too much solitude breeds only ghosts." The High Sovereign turned to go, but stopped at the door. "Remember? No man builds greatness from shadow alone." When he'd gone, Riki realized with a peculiar ache that this brief exchange was more than he'd shared with his father in months. Secrets in candlelight. Isolation grew both thorn and shield. At meals, Riki sat amid noise, but heard little meant for him. Veilen discussed border politics and new alliances with their father. Cassian recounted tales from merchant caravans or composed impromptu poems for their mother's amusement. Riki answered when addressed, but was often overlooked. His opinions neither sought nor missed. His mother showed concern in small ways, urging him to eat more, sending fresh fruit to his rooms. But hers was an affection shaped by habit rather than insight. She did not ask where he disappeared on moonless nights or why dust clung to his tunics at dawn. If Riki sometimes resented this neglect, more often it granted him latitude denied his brothers. With no expectations to uphold or courtly obligations to fulfill, he could slip out after curfew and climb battlements overlooked by all but owls. It was on such a night that he noticed a gathering near the servants' quarter. A game of dice played low beneath wind-scattered sycamores by off-duty guardsmen and city dock hands. Curiosity prickled. Riki melted into shadow, listening as bets changed hands and tales were swapped. News from Deadwood Pass, rumors of a new warlord in Crimwell, stories about masked assassins who left only blue smoke behind. One grizzled guard spat into the grass and said, "No true killer leaves tracks, not for coin nor for king." Another laughed harshly. "They say Talon itself hides such ghosts inside its walls." Riki withdrew before they could sense him, heart beating quick at this accidental glimpse behind both mask and rumor, a brotherly duel. A week after harvest celebrations ended, Veilen issued a challenge in the central courtyard, a ceremonial match between brothers before assembled house retainers and visiting dignitaries from Caer Venor. Cassian declined with gracious excuses. "Alas, my talents are better served with song than saber," leaving Riki as Veilen's only opponent. It was meant in jest, a display for guests rather than contest, but pride prickled beneath Riki's skin as he accepted amid scattered applause. Veilen wore the regalia of a warrior prince, gleaming cuirass engraved with their house sigil, twin swords sheathed at his hips. Riki wore plain sparring garb and carried only a single battered short blade borrowed from the armory rack. They circled each other beneath a tent of eyes, the crowd expecting an easy victory for the heir apparent. Veilen opened with textbook precision, feints to draw guard high before sweeping low for a trip that would have felled any untrained partner. Riki sidestepped with unexpected grace, recalling footwork memorized from silent hours in the library, then countered with a sharp tap to Veilen's wrist that drew startled laughter from the crowd. The duel unfolded faster than anticipated, each brother testing boundaries more than skill. Veilen pressed harder, genuine irritation flickering beneath practiced smiles. Riki responded not with brute force, but agility and unpredictability, letting himself stumble one moment only to pivot into an unorthodox riposte the next. When Veilen finally disarmed him, to polite cheers, there was sweat on both brows, and something sharper in Veilen's eyes than mere competitive satisfaction. "Well fought," Veilen said loudly enough for all to hear, but as they bowed to each other out of view, he added quietly, "You surprise me." Riki did not answer aloud, but inside something kindled. Not pride exactly, but awareness that observation could become action, that being overlooked was its own kind of weapon. Into shadow. As another season shifted, nights growing longer and air tinged with frost, Riki intensified his secret studies. He ventured more frequently into the lower districts under cover of darkness, watching how thieves pocketed purses without notice, following patrol routes until he could predict every turn by sound alone. Sometimes he visited taverns known for harboring exiles or mercenaries, listening rather than drinking, learning which words bought loyalty and which invited knives. His knowledge grew less academic and more practical. How silence could be shaped into armor. How disappearance could be an act of will rather than chance. From battered training blades he moved up to real daggers filched from complacent guardsmen, their loss blamed on absent-mindedness rather than theft. Yet isolation remained both companion and adversary. There were moments, watching torchlight flicker across sleeping faces or hearing laughter echo down empty galleries, when envy gnawed at him for what came so easily to others, belonging, certainty. But then he'd remember Veilen's surprise after the duel, Cassian's gentle defense by moonlit stairwell, even his father's rare approval in the armory vault, and understand that these fleeting acknowledgments mattered only so much as he allowed them power over him. Meaning would not be handed down from throne or family crest. It had to be seized from the silence between breaths. The path ahead. Winter deepened over Talon. The river ken choked with ice floes, market stalls draped in furs and woolens. Within citadel walls, life became quieter, less spectacle, more waiting. A kingdom holding its breath beneath snow-laden eaves. For most, this was a time for feasting indoors or telling stories beside roaring hearths. For Riki, it became an invitation to slip deeper into unopened doors and forgotten passageways, to test himself not only against imagined foes, but against fear itself. One bitter dawn he found himself upon a narrow parapet that overlooked both city lights and distant wilds, a place where shadow merged seamlessly with mist rolling off high peaks. He stood there for some time, no longer asking what it meant to be unseen, but wondering what might happen if he chose instead to become unforgettable, not by birthright or accident, but by design. Somewhere below, bells tolled for morning prayers, the dynasty awakening again in ritual certainty. But Riki turned away from their summons and faded into silence once more, certain at last that purpose could be found even where no light shone brightly enough to name it aloud. And thus did Talon's ghost begin forging legend, not from crowds or crowns, but from every whisper left behind where shadow met yearning. The Dynasty of Shadows. Part 3. The Hidden Edge. Winter pressed hard against the stones of Talon's citadel, but within its veined walls a different chill lingered, the kind that silences laughter, that makes every step echo too loudly in marbled corridors. Riki moved through these corridors in the manner he had always known best, quietly, unnoticed, a silent thread of blue and shadow weaving between tapestry and pillar. Only now there was purpose behind his stride. For weeks after his dawn vigil on the parapet, a question gripped him, a question sharper than any blade. How does one rise when no light is given? It was this question that led him at last to his father's private chamber beneath the Hall of Stars. He waited at the threshold until Elen, High Sovereign of Talon, signaled him forward with a distracted flick of his hand. The chamber was lined with books and maps, globes etched with ley lines and constellations. The only mark of warmth was a single candle guttering on the desk, its flame battling the wide winter gloom. Riki bowed, hands clasped behind his back to still their trembling. "Father," he began, voice pitched low and steady, "I wish to request a tutor in swordcraft, a proper one." Elen did not look up at once. He finished annotating a scroll, his script angular and precise, and set it aside. "You have instructors aplenty," he said without inflection. "Not for this," Riki pressed. "I need more than the drills in the yard. I want someone who understands the blade, not merely its weight, but its meaning." He hesitated, then added, "Someone who can teach me to defend our house as you would wish." A flicker crossed a lion's eyes, surprise mingled with scrutiny. "And which of your brothers has set this ambition in you?" Riki met his gaze. "Neither," he said honestly, "but I will not always be your shadow, father." The words tasted like defiance, but Riki let them linger. Elen considered him in silence long enough that the candle's flame seemed to bow under his gaze. At last, "Very well, I will send for someone suitable." His tone held no warmth, only a tired finality. "Do not disappoint me with half measures." Riki bowed again before retreating, head spinning with mingled relief and uncertainty. As he slipped into the corridor, where frost rimed every stained glass window, he wondered what manner of teacher his father would deem suitable. He did not know that the answer would change the course of not just his own fate, but that of the dynasty itself. The arrival. Word came 2 days later, by way of a discreet page. Riki was to present himself at the North Wing's training hall at first bell. He arrived early, heart pounding beneath layered wool, swords ringing faintly in a distant yard as older squires began their morning drills. The North Wing was older than most parts of the Citadel, a place where banners from forgotten campaigns hung faded above the dust. In the center stood a single figure, cloaked in midnight blue, face hooded and hands gloved, leaning with casual assurance upon a staff. Riki paused at the threshold. The stranger lifted their head just enough for torchlight to catch on features both sharp and oddly unreadable. "You are late," came the greeting, a voice smooth as oil over stone. "I'm early," Riki replied before he could think better of it. The figure smiled, the faintest curl of the mouth, unreadable whether it was approval or mockery. "Early is late to someone who rises before his enemies." He straightened and offered a short bow. "I am called Cassian. By your father's command, I am to make you less vulnerable than rumor suggests." Riki felt heat rise to his cheeks, but said nothing. Cassian circled him once, slowly, as if assessing both body and soul for flaws invisible to common sight. "You look like a Talon," he said at last, "but you move like you wish not to be one." Riki bristled, but forced himself still. "Perhaps I've had reason," he said quietly. Cassian's gaze flickered, amused, or perhaps intrigued. "We shall see if you have reason to change that." With no further ceremony, Cassian tossed a wooden practice blade toward Riki. He caught it clumsily by the hilt. "Show me what you know," Cassian said, stepping barefoot onto the mats. First lessons. They began with simple forms, cuts and parries Riki had drilled since childhood under bored arms masters. Cassian watched in silence for several minutes before stepping in to block a strike with his staff, not with force, but with effortless precision that turned Riki's momentum against himself. "You think too loudly," Cassian murmured as they spun apart. Riki frowned, readying another attack, but Cassian slipped through his guard as if made of smoke and sent him sprawling onto cold rushes. Again, they repeated the exercise until sweat beaded Riki's brow and every muscle burned. Time after time, Cassian found his balance wanting, his footwork sloppy, his grip too tense. Why do you hesitate? Cassian asked at last, after Riki failed yet another feint. Riki grimaced. Because I do not wish to hurt you. Cassian gave a short laugh, not unkind. It is not injury you fear, but judgment. He knelt beside Riki where he sat winded on the mats. You are too concerned with being seen by your brothers, your father, he added pointedly. The blade cares nothing for witnesses. Only intent matters. Riki looked away. I am never seen. Cassian studied him for a moment in silence, a gaze that seemed to weigh more than words ever could. Then let us begin from where you already excel, from silence, a different discipline. In the days that followed, Cassian's approach proved unlike any Riki had endured before. There were hours spent blindfolded in echoing chambers, forced to listen for a blade's whistle or a boot's soft tread through velvet dark. Afternoons learning how to judge distance by breath alone. Cassian's lessons were riddles shaped into movement. What is softer than snow but cuts deeper than steel? The answer, a lie, and thus came drills in feinting with body language rather than blade. They trained late into evenings, while frost coated the window panes and moonlight painted ghostly shapes across stone floors. Once, Cassian led Riki atop the outer wall, where wind howled sharp as any blade. There is more threat here than in any duel, Cassian said quietly as they balanced along the narrow parapet, 20 stories above stone courtyards below. Learn to master fear, or it will master you. At first, Riki trembled, not from cold, but from vertigo and doubt. But step by trembling step, he found balance upon stone, worn smooth by centuries of wind and watchmen's boots. Cassian nodded approval each time Riki steadied himself and did not fall. Of shadows and masks. On the 4th week of their lessons, with snow now drifting in thick sheets beyond city gates, Cassian introduced something new. He entered the training hall wearing a mask, half-shadowed lacquer, half-burnished gold, a mimicry of Talon's own crest, but twisted subtly so neither light nor darkness won dominance. Riki stared as Cassian approached him, holding 2 more masks. Choose, Cassian said simply. Riki selected the mask most like night itself. Blue-black lacquer, streaked with silver thread as thin as spider silk, and slipped it over his face. Now move as one who wears nothing at all, Cassian instructed. It was far harder than Riki imagined. Every motion felt strange under the weight of anonymity. His breathing fogged inside the mask. Peripheral vision narrowed. Sweat made everything itch beneath the rigid shell. But gradually he learned, first how to control his pulse so it did not betray him, then how to watch without being seen. Finally, how to step into another's path so quietly they never knew they'd been followed until it was too late. You are beginning to understand, Cassian remarked after one silent exercise in which Riki trailed him unseen through 4 levels of winding galleries without alerting even a single guard dog. Riki felt something kindle within, a pride deeper than any handed down at family feasts or tournaments, questions without answers. Outside their lessons, little changed in Riki's public standing. If anything, he became more withdrawn, his world narrowing to corridor shadows and Cassian's cryptic guidance. At meals, he spoke little, content to let Veilen or the youngest brother claim attention with tales of hunting or court disputes. Only once did Veilen corner him near the menagerie, a place wilder than most parts of Talon's ordered life. You look thinner since Father hired your tutor, Veilen commented with a half-smile that never reached his eyes. Is he working you so hard? Riki shrugged. He teaches well. Veilen studied him curiously. I hope you find whatever you seek out there in frost and shadow. He let his hand linger on Riki's shoulder, a gesture strangely gentle for one so proud, and then departed without waiting for reply. Riki watched him go, wondering if Veilen suspected just how much was shifting beneath outward calm. Revelation. One freezing night, when even city cats vanished from alleys, a runner arrived at Riki's door bearing an invitation sealed in black wax. He was summoned to Cassian's own quarters near the outermost curtain wall, a place seldom visited by anyone save old guards or servants tasked with winding midnight bells. Cassian waited by candlelight amid sparse furnishings, a cot barely large enough for a grown man, shelves lined not with books but strange objects, vials of powder, coils of wire, knives flattened for easy concealment. He gestured for Riki to sit opposite him on a furred rug beside the hearth. You have done well, Cassian said without preamble. Well enough now that you must learn what no Talon lord would dare teach openly. He drew out two objects from beneath his cloak, a pair of curved daggers, oddly balanced, yet beautiful, and laid them across Riki's knees. Blades are honest, Cassian continued softly, but honesty is seldom safe in courts or city streets. He leaned forward so shadow masked half his face. You must become what others will never expect, a whisper behind enemy lines, a rumor turned fatal. Riki's fingers curled around each dagger's hilt experimentally, the cold steel biting into flesh in warning and promise both. I thought you were just a swordsman, Riki said quietly. Cassian smiled without humor. I wore many faces before your father sought my counsel. Duelist, vagabond, sometimes worse. His tone darkened, but remained calm. This world rewards those who can disappear and return unseen. Riki understood then that this was no ordinary training, that each lesson had been a thread woven into something vaster than the swordplay, a tapestry whose pattern only now began to emerge. Trial by night, true apprenticeship began thereafter, not upon training mats, but amid moonlit eaves and dripping gutters above sleeping townsfolk below. Cassian showed him secret paths across slate rooftops slick with frost, how to scale walls using only finger holds wary birds might trust, where best to wait and listen while city guards traded jokes about noble sons who couldn't tie their own boots. Once they stalked through mist-shrouded gardens just before dawn, Cassian leading always 3 paces ahead or behind, according to some private calculus only he understood. A sudden bark shattered quiet. 2 guards rounding a bend by chance from opposite directions. Without thought, Riki ducked into yew hedges thick with snow, heartbeat thrumming in his ears as Cassian flattened himself against cold stone less than an arm's length away from torchlight's reach. The guards passed on oblivious. Only then did Cassian allow himself a whisper, "Good. Fear sharpens senses, but do not let it freeze you still." Later, they crossed paths with an old beggar muttering curses at invisible ghosts. Cassian pressed 2 coins into gnarled hands with such practiced sleight of hand that even Riki barely noticed until it was already done. Why help him? Riki asked as they melted back into shadowed arcades. Because every mask requires an audience, Cassian replied quietly. And some stories are best owed in coins rather than blood. Tests unseen, the months slipped by with deceptive quickness, as if each lesson wove winter tighter around citadel hearts, while stretching daylight ever thinner over Talon's dreaming spires. Riki grew leaner, but stronger, his eyes sharper for having watched both friend and foe from concealed vantage points above city squares or below market bridges where thieves whispered secrets about coming war and mages haggled over amulets honed from river ice. Cassian presented new challenges each week, tracking an unknown target through labyrinthine servant passages without alerting kitchen staff, scaling watchtower walls during festival nights when fires burned brightest and guards were least attentive, learning how to blend among festival goers masked as spirits from Dota legend, unnoticed even when standing mere steps from those who might recognize Talon blood at a glance. One memorable evening during Frost Vale, the festival honoring ice spirits, Cassian vanished into crowds swaddled in blue silk and wolf pelts, leaving only cryptic hint: "Find me before midnight or your next lesson will be twice as hard." Riki hunted through lantern-lit processions and echoing temples until just before bells tolled 12. He found Cassian dancing silently atop an ice-sheathed fountain, surrounded by revelers who laughed at their own reflections, rather than notice the predator moving among them unseen. "You learn quickly when your pride is at stake," Cassian remarked later, as they slipped back toward citadel gates beneath colored banners fluttering like ghosts above empty streets. Trust forged in shadow. As winter deepened further and rumors began circulating about unrest beyond Talon's borders, a war band sighted near Kian's frozen banks, mages fleeing south out of fear more than snow, Riki found himself drawn ever closer to Cassian, not just as mentor, but as confidant. They shared few words outside lessons, but those exchanged carried weight. Advice on poisons brewed from common garden plants, warnings about which servants overheard more than they admitted, stories about other cities where trust was bought dearly and betrayal cost even more. One night, after an especially grueling rooftop chase, during which Riki nearly slipped into icy darkness, they crouched breathless together beneath an old copper statue depicting Slyrak, wreathed in flame, a relic left over from an age when dragons ruled men's dreams instead of nightmares. "Why help me?" Riki asked suddenly, not out of suspicion, but genuine curiosity. Cassian watched snow drift off Slyrak's outstretched wing before answering softly, "Because even shadows hunger for purpose, and perhaps I see more of myself in you than suits my pride." He threw Riki one of his signature knives then, as if in benediction, and vanished into darkness before gratitude could become an awkward debt between them. A glimpse beyond, the lessons grew less about technique and more about intuition, the art behind movement rather than its mechanics, feeling when to wait instead of strike, recognizing which opportunities belong not just to warriors, but to survivors willing to become more than legend demanded. One blizzard-torn morning, as bells summoned nobles for council, their peals muffled by thick snow, Cassian found Riki watching from high above, their vantage point atop an unused bell tower, granting view over city walls and far-off peaks rimmed by pale firelight, reflected off clouds heavy with promise or threat. "It is almost time," Cassian murmured beside him, voice nearly lost amid wind and tolling brass. "Soon you will walk alone, Riki nodded, though what awaited him beyond this moment remained unknowable as any prophecy scrawled in ink already smudged by fate's indifferent hand. Yet, standing there together, mentor and student shrouded by cold and anticipation, he felt something shift inside, not belonging perhaps, nor certainty, but a sense that purpose could indeed be seized from silence itself, if only one dared reach far enough into darkness for it. Thus did winter pass over Talon, the dynasty unaware that somewhere within its veiled halls a legend was already taking shape, not forged by birthright alone, but steeled in shadow and earned stride by silent stride under watchful eyes that saw not just danger, but destiny. The Dynasty of Shadows. Part 4. The Art of Silence. Night bled into morning over Talon, the City of Lights, with only the faintest silver haze touching the high-arched windows of the citadel. Outside, snow-dusted rooftops and wove itself in whirls between empty market stalls. Within, warmth blossomed from braziers fed with alchemical coals, and silence ruled the lesser corridors before the day's chimes began. It was in such pockets of hush that Riki thrived best, away from the ever-watchful eyes of his family and the duties that pressed him to be someone else. It was also where Cassian, his mentor, preferred to begin that day's lessons. They met in an unused gallery overlooking the inner courts, a narrow space lined with ancient tapestries depicting victories long faded to myth, watched over by a stone effigy of some forgotten goddess. Cassian stood at the window, his outline blurred by the frost catching dawn's first light. He did not turn when Riki entered. Instead, he spoke quietly, as if to the city itself. "Tell me, Prince, what do you see?" Riki hesitated. He followed Cassian's gaze. Below, servants scurried between kitchens and stables. Guards changed posts with clockwork precision. The sun, barely risen, set blue fire to the city's marble towers. "A city waking," Riki replied at last. "People with tasks, soldiers looking for threats." "And the threats they miss?" Cassian pressed, his tone gentle but sharp as a dagger's edge. Riki frowned, studying again. There, a shadow that lingered too long beneath the arches, a flicker of movement where none should be. A window shutter closed out of sequence with its neighbors. He answered with growing confidence, "Not all danger wears armor or stands in plain sight." "Good." Cassian smiled, quick and thin. "That is the first lesson, to see as others do not. The difference between survival and death has ever been measured by what passes unnoticed." He turned from the window then, gestures fluid as wind through silk. The lesson had begun. Masks and memory. Their training grew stranger as the weeks slid by, less about swordplay and more about vanishing into places no noble son should tread. Cassian taught him to move soundlessly through the darkened halls, to read lips in moonlight and mimic footsteps until even hounds scented nothing but shadow in his wake. Yet it was not only technique Cassian imparted, he taught through story, each lesson a thread tugged from the tangled fabric of his own past. One evening, after a grueling run across rain-slick rooftops, Riki found Cassian waiting beside a hidden garden pool. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and wet earth. Cassian did not instruct, but beckoned him closer, producing from a fold in his cloak a battered wooden mask, half-painted, its features carved into a perpetual sneer. "I wore this once," Cassian said softly, turning it over in strong, scarred hands. far from here, in a city called Vashundal. Riki recognized the name. A den of thieves and clandestine guilds whispered about by Talon's guards. "What were you?" Riki asked, curiosity battling unease. Cassian's eyes narrowed, seeing some ghost beyond the ripples in the pool. "A blade for hire, a master of blending into crowds and slipping through locked doors. I learned that trust is a currency spent quickly, and that masks are worn not just on faces." He paused, as if weighing how much truth to offer. In Vashundal, there were no tournaments or noble games, only choices, strike first or die second. I became many things to many men, a friend for an evening, a shadow at their heels. I thought myself untouchable. He handed Riki the mask. It was heavier than it seemed, cold against his skin. "There are dangers to forgetting who you are beneath your mask," Cassian finished quietly, "but greater danger still in never learning to wear one at all." And so Riki listened, of escapes through labyrinthine canals, poisonings disguised as accidents, silent duels fought atop palace domes under a sky turned red with fire, lessons in silence. The practical drills came swiftly after. Cassian led him into forgotten cellars below the citadel, where dust muffled sound and only their lanterns pierced the gloom. There he taught Riki the art of silence, not just as absence of sound, but as an act of intent. "Stillness," Cassian whispered, pressing 2 fingertips to Riki's breastbone. "Let your heart beat slow. Breathe with the walls. Do not fight them." He scattered pebbles across layered rugs and had Riki cross barefooted, correcting every misstep, a shifting weight here, a flexed toe there, until even Riki's own ears could not catch his passage. Then traps, simple wire snares at first, then intricate puzzles involving pressure plates and silent darts. Cassian showed how a killer prepared not only for attack, but for escape, how every corridor could be a theater for misdirection or death. "Never trust what you see," Cassian intoned during one such exercise, springing a hidden panel that sent a rain of powder tumbling harmlessly to the floor while a razor-thin blade whipped from an unexpected angle. "Trust only what you control, or what you can change in an instant." Failures were met not with anger, but with relentless repetition, until muscle remembered what mind had learned. Artistry and smoke. One chill night, after supper bells had faded and only distant laughter from guards on watch drifted up through open windows, Cassian led Riki up onto the highest parapet of Talon's keep. The city below shimmered in pools of witchlight. Above them spun stars so sharp they could have been knives themselves. Cassian produced 2 small glass vials, swirling with smoky liquid that glinted violet in torchlight. "Dust of Serene," he said reverently, "a gift from far-off lands, a trick beloved by both thieves and assassins." He demonstrated uncorking one vial and tossing it at his own feet. The smoke erupted outward, not choking or blinding, but bending light itself so that Cassian's outline seemed to flicker and melt away. "For confusion," he explained from somewhere behind Riki now, "and for freedom." Riki's own attempt was less elegant. He coughed as smoke stung his nose, but determination drove him onward. Cassian walked him through every step, how to time a distraction, how to vanish between blinks, how to sense when an enemy's attention faltered so that escape was not flight, but mastery over perception itself. Most men look for foes where blades flash, Cassian mused later as they watched smoke curl away on icy wind. But true power lies in what is unseen, in the heartbeat between fear and recognition. Truths shared in shadow. It was after such lessons, a winter's worth of discipline and bruised shins, that Riki began to see his mentor in new light. Cassian was both more and less than he'd assumed, not merely a killer, but a survivor, stitched together by necessity and regret. One night, as snow battered the shutters and firelight danced across stone walls, Riki found courage enough to ask, "Did you ever regret it? The things you did, the lives you took?" Cassian looked up sharply from sharpening a curved dagger, a rare moment when his guard slipped. "Regret is a luxury," he finally said, voice rough with memory. "But I remember every face, even those I met only once in darkness." He sheathed his blade with deliberate care. "I teach you these arts not for glory or vengeance, but because there will come a time when being unseen is all that stands between you and oblivion." Riki absorbed this quietly, the understanding that survival sometimes demanded more than skill. It demanded acceptance of what one must become. Tests within walls. Spring thawed Talon streets before anyone marked its coming. The river Ken, swelling beneath melting snows, green buds daring through cracks in old stones. With it came new tests. Cassian began setting real challenges within the citadel itself. "Tonight," he whispered one evening, as lamplight flickered over maps spread across Riki's study table, "you will enter your father's council chamber unseen and retrieve this." He placed an ornate ring on the table, a signet bearing Talon's sigil. "You have until dawn, and no one may notice your passage." The task seemed impossible. Guards at every entry, magical wards humming along thresholds, servants whose eyes missed little. Yet Riki relished it, the thrill bordering terror as he mapped routes through servant corridors, timed patrols by breath and bell, improvised diversions with dropped goblets or whispered rumors overheard from gossiping maids. Twice he nearly failed, once caught by a sleepy page boy whose silence he purchased with a flash of coin, once narrowly avoiding detection when a guard dog scented his presence through a poorly timed gust of wind. He remembered Cassian's advice then. Stand perfectly still, become part of the stone. By dawn's pale light, he knelt before Cassian again, ring in hand, heart hammering with pride and disbelief. Cassian only smiled softly and clapped him on the shoulder, a rare gesture from a man so sparing with praise. "You are learning," he said simply, "not just how to vanish, but how to choose when not to." Echoes of war. Outside their secretive world, news seeped slowly into Talon like water through cracked mortar. Distant border towns razed by unknown hands. Merchant caravans vanishing in forests once thought safe. More mages arriving each week seeking sanctuary behind Talon's wards. At times during training, Riki glimpsed fresh tension behind Cassian's steady mask, a flicker of unease quickly quelled. He understood enough now to guess that even masters feared shadows they could not name. One storm-lit evening, as thunder rattled glass panes above them, Cassian broke their silence with words honed sharper than any blade. "There will come a night when all your training must serve not yourself alone, but those who cannot hide behind walls or names. Remember this: loyalty is its own armor. But sometimes armor must be cast aside for something greater. Riki watched him then, not just as mentor, but as man, saw grief veiled beneath discipline, and felt himself changed by both empathy and resolve. Inheritance of shadows. Their last lessons together foreshadowed trials yet unspoken, midnight excursions beyond citadel walls where they practiced blending among commoners, games of pursuit across half-deserted bridges where Riki learned not only how to evade, but how to track an enemy by scent and silhouette alone. In each trial, Cassian gave less direct guidance, stepping further into background shadows, forcing Riki to trust instincts honed by weeks of hardship and doubt. Sometimes they would pause atop city ramparts, watching dawn creep toward them over sleeping rooftops. And in those moments, Cassian would recount some fragment from battles waged beneath banners now forgotten by all but ghosts. "You will one day walk alone," his mentor warned quietly as dawn painted gold across their frozen breath. "But what I leave you is more than technique. It is freedom from expectation, from fear, even from yourself if you dare claim it." And Riki believed him, not as child believes hero tales, but as apprentice recognizes truth hammered upon soul's anvil, one hard lesson at a time. Beneath masks, a bond forged. Their bond grew iron strong within secrecy's crucible, a trust rare even among kin in Talon's chambered heart. They spoke little outside training hours, but their silences brimmed with shared meaning. A glance exchanged over supper, an absent gesture toward concealed weapons when visitors arrived unannounced. Laughter hidden amid sword play when neither could feign indifference any longer. Cassian's stories left echoes within Riki, warnings about pride and isolation, glimpses into worlds where power meant little without control over self's darker urges. He began to understand how legacy was more than blood or throne. It was memory carried forward by those who survived to remember both cost and cause. One night, after yet another failed attempt at picking an impossibly complex lock, the tumblers enchanted by spells older than the dynasty itself, Riki slumped back against cold stone with a groan. "How did you ever manage this?" he grumbled. Cassian chuckled, a sound like gravel warmed by sun. "I've failed more times than I can count. Success is merely persistence disguised as talent." And for once, Riki allowed himself a smile, accepting that perfection was no birthright, but an inheritance won through patience and pain alike. The weight of names, as spring tipped toward summer, and Talon prepared for festivals meant to banish winter's cold, Riki felt himself straddling two worlds, heir to a house whose brightness cast long shadows, and apprentice to secrets that cared little for banners or bloodlines. In quiet hours, he fingered the battered mask left by Cassian, a token now both talisman and warning, and wondered which version of himself would inherit Talon's future. The prince shaped by duty, or the whisper beneath masks who moved unseen among legends yet unwritten. Whatever answer awaited him beyond stone walls and starlit parapets, he knew this much. He would carry his mentor's lessons forever, not merely as skill, but as shield against whatever darkness gathered next at Talon's gates, and within his own restless soul. Thus did Riki learn to walk both seen and unseen, a shadow among lords and dreams alike, as somewhere beyond citadel lights, fate sharpened its knives, and waited patient for heirs born not just of blood, but of silence. The Dynasty of Shadows. Part 5. Baptism in Silence. Night had settled over Talon's city of lights, masking its marble towers and silver-veined walls in a velvet gloom. Even the witch lights that floated above the colonnades guttered low as midnight approached, as if the city itself sensed trouble tiptoeing through its veins. Within the palace's secret apartments, Riki waited in silence, perched on the edge of a window ledge high above a shadow-laced courtyard. He was swaddled in midnight blues and grays, clothes specially stitched by Cassian for quiet movement. The battered mask, with its stylized smile, rested atop his head, half lowered, as if undecided between hiding and revealing. From below, Cassian's hoarse whisper drifted up. Now, Riki didn't hesitate. He slipped from the ledge, dropping into the darkness with the mute grace of a falling leaf. The stone bit cold against his fingers as he caught a ledge mid-fall and rolled into a crouch beside his mentor. Cassian's eyes glinted beneath his own mask, one far older and more battered than Riki's, an heirloom from wars beneath other banners. Remember, breath and blade, don't rush what must be silent. He pressed a palm to Riki's shoulder, grounding him. Riki nodded, heart hammering beneath his ribs. He'd trained for months, lock-picking, climbing sheer walls, disarming traps, moving with soundless precision, but nothing in those lessons compared to this. The knowledge that tonight his hands would be blooded, that he would step across the boundary between boy and assassin. He followed Cassian through the hedge-shadowed gardens toward the outer wall, where a postern door led to the old city's prison quarter. It loomed austere, a squat mass of stone and rune-branded iron watched by hooded guards whose eyes glimmered with suspicion even at this late hour. Cassian produced a token, an ivory medallion marked with Talon's sigil, and spoke quietly to the sentries. "Inspection on orders of the sovereign," he murmured, his voice muffled by his mask, but edged with command. The guards barely glanced at Riki, mistaking him for a servant or junior apprentice. Cassian's presence radiated authority. Doors opened before them with only the faintest scrape of metal. Inside, the air grew heavy, redolent with damp stone, stale straw, and the faint metallic tang of blood left too long on flagstones. The torchlight flickered up arching corridors, lined with cell doors bound in black iron. Somewhere deeper in the bowels of the prison, a man screamed, a raw animal sound abruptly cut short. Riki stilled. "We're not alone," he whispered. "No one is ever truly alone here," Cassian replied grimly. "But our path is set. Follow my lead." They wound down spiral stairs and past shadowed alcoves where half-seen shapes stirred behind bars. At every turn, Cassian moved with uncanny certainty, slipping past guards like a shade, confusing them with brief scraps of conversation or gestures borrowed from the city's own jailers. Riki matched his steps, nerves taut, but mind oddly clear, the way it always was when danger sharpened every sense. Finally, they reached a cell at the end of an unlit corridor. Here, the stonework was older. Runes crawled across it in patterns meant to suppress magic and hope alike. Within sat their target, a man slumped against iron bars, wrists shackled before him, hood drawn low over his face. Cassian nodded toward the lock. Riki knelt, exhaling slowly. He drew forth his lockpicks, silver wires, and steel tumblers Cassian had helped him forge, and set to work. The mechanism was intricate. Wards layered around tiny glass vials set to shatter and release blinding smoke if jostled wrong. He recalled Cassian's mantra, "Feel with your fingertips. The tumblers will sing if you listen." He did. The picks danced and sang under his breath as cold sweat beaded along his brow. For an endless moment, nothing moved. And then, with a click softer than a sigh, the lock yielded. The door creaked open. Cassian lingered at his shoulder. "Well done," he whispered, pride flickering behind his words like torchlight behind lattice work. Riki entered alone. Inside, the prisoner stirred, but did not rise. A single torch guttered in a sconce above his head. Its light revealed a face neither young nor old, scarred by battle and bruised by recent interrogations. Riki hesitated. The man looked up, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. "Come to finish it?" His voice carried no fear, only resignation. Riki stepped forward and drew his blade, a dagger honed to razor fineness in Cassian's workshop. "My name doesn't matter," the prisoner said quietly. "You're just another shadow in this place." The words pricked something in Riki. Not guilt exactly, but a fierce rush of doubt. Was this truly justice, or simply another game played by those who held power in Talon's name? He thought of his father's indifference, Cassian's lessons on control, the mask that pressed cool against his skin, a mask that felt less like protection now and more like inheritance. He crouched beside the man. "Why are you here?" A dry laugh. "Because I lost. That's all that matters in this city." Riki closed his eyes for just an instant, then acted. His blade flashed once, swift, precise, a killing stroke delivered without flourish or rage. The man died silently, his last breath a whisper, lost in stone. When it was done, Riki retreated into himself, feeling the world narrow to a tunnel around him. Blood pooled darkly beneath the prisoner's body, crimson soaking into straw and stone alike. Cassian entered quietly and placed a hand on Riki's trembling shoulder. "You did what was required," he said softly. "Sometimes mercy is found not in sparing life, but in ending pain quickly." Riki shook just once, then steadied himself. He rose, breathing deep as he wiped his blade clean upon prison rags. "We must leave," Cassian said, "and you must remember, do not carry this alone." They retraced their steps through corridors that now seemed closer and colder than before. Twice more they passed guards, silent shades lost in their own torpor, and each time Cassian shielded Riki with words or shadows until they reached night air once more. A lesson paid in blood. They returned to Cassian's quarters through concealed passages linking prison and palace, emerging at last into a moonlit colonnade overlooking Talon's sleeping gardens. There, safe behind closed shutters and thick curtains, Cassian poured wine, dark as ink, and handed Riki a cup. "To your first kill," he said quietly. Riki hesitated before drinking. The wine tasted bitter, like iron or old regret. "Do you hate me for it?" he asked suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. Cassian's expression softened. "A rare thing. Number, I have taught you what I know because I saw that you were already lost to shadows long before we met." He tapped his chest gently. "I would spare you if I could, but I would not send you unarmed into this world's darkness. Riki stared into his cup and saw there not wine, but memory, the flicker of torches on stone walls, the man's calm acceptance of death, his own heartbeat thundering as he crossed that final line. Does it get easier? Cassian looked away, a flicker of grief carved deep into his features. Number, it gets quieter. They sat in silence for some time, then master and student bound by secrets none else in Talon would ever share. Dawn's long shadows, the next morning, brought no rest or reprieve. Court business rolled on with its usual stately indifference to crimes committed beneath its stones. Riki attended breakfast as always, a silent figure at one end of a gilded table while lords and scholars debated trade tariffs and border skirmishes with pompous gravity. His father, High Sovereign Elen, shot him a single glance, sharp as cold steel, but said nothing about bloodshed or dungeons or masks. A game was being played here too, one of precedence and patience, where every silence might hide threat or test alike. Later that day, Riki found himself summoned to Cassian's training hall, a place now heavy with new meaning after their night's work. Again! Cassian barked as they sparred across flagstone floors slick with morning dew. Riki obeyed reflexively, muscle memory moving his limbs even when mind wandered elsewhere. Blades clashed, steel against steel, and each time Cassian pressed him harder, driving home lessons about footwork, timing, control. "Don't hesitate," Cassian admonished, as Riki faltered mid-step. "You cannot afford mercy, not for yourself or for your enemies." Sweat stung Riki's eyes as he ducked beneath an arcing blow, then riposted, striking at Cassian's exposed side with speed born of desperation rather than discipline. "Better," Cassian grunted approvingly. "Let doubt fuel your resolve, but never let it paralyze you." Their training ended in breathless exhaustion, neither willing to speak first about what had changed between them since last night. Instead, Cassian handed Riki a fresh mask, this one made of river pearl and hammered silver leaf, and told him quietly, "You are my equal now in craft, if not yet in scars, unseen wounds." That evening, Riki walked alone through Talon's maze of hanging gardens, past fountains rimmed with moon blossoms and statues older than dynasty itself. He found himself at the cryptic heart of one garden, a pool shaded by willows where city rumors claimed ghosts gathered at dusk. He knelt by water's edge and studied his own reflection, the mask now lowered fully over his face, blue eyes burning through slitted holes like twin shards of ice. He remembered the prisoner's words, "Because I lost." Is that what fate offered anyone who stepped away from power in Talon? Was mercy merely another word for defeat? He dipped fingertips into cool water, washing away blood no eyes could see, and whispered a vow only moonlight heard. "I will not become what they expect." Whether they meant family or fate or unseen powers lurking behind thrones, he could not yet say. Master and shadow, the days that followed were marked by change so subtle only those who lived in the palace shadows noticed it. Cassian treated Riki differently now, not as pupil, but partner in crime. Their conversations shaded with mutual respect rather than correction alone. "You learn quickly," Cassian remarked one evening, as they sat sharpening knives together beside an open window overlooking Talon's rooftops. "So did you," Riki replied quietly. Cassian smiled, grimly but not unkindly. I learned because I had no choice. You have made yours. Outside bells pealed midnight across the city. Inside, 2 generations of assassins exchanged secrets by candlelight, each teaching the other more than either dared admit aloud. Masks within masks. Life resumed its rhythms above ground. Festivals prepared for spring, banishing winter's chill. Lanterns strung across bridges. Nobles plotting marriages and alliances over fine wine and spiced bread. Yet beneath these gentle facades ran currents invisible to most, a network of spies and shadows loyal not to banners, but to balance itself. Riki moved through these currents now with new confidence, eavesdropping on whispered conspiracies among merchant guilds, decoding coded missives left in hidden alcoves, slipping into forbidden archives for secrets meant only for kingly eyes. Each night, he returned to Cassian, reporting what he'd learned, piecing together mosaic patterns hinting at unrest, brewing both within Talon and beyond its borders. Baronies growing restless, mercenaries hired from far-off lands, ancient rivalries rekindled by secret promise or threat. "You see?" Cassian mused one night as they pored over stolen letters by lamplight. "We fight not just for thrones, but for balance of shadow and light itself." Riki nodded, understanding finally dawning that their role was not merely executioner, but guardian in ways most would never comprehend. A scar for every lesson. But even as Riki grew into his new identity, half prince, half shadow, the memory of that first kill haunted him, sometimes as nightmare, sometimes as hollow ache beneath every triumph won in secrecy's name. One stormy night, he confessed as much to Cassian. "I see his eyes sometimes before I sleep." Cassian did not mock or dismiss this weakness. Instead, he clasped Riki's shoulder firmly. "You will lose count one day. That is truth none will speak aloud. But if you forget their faces entirely, then you are lost indeed." So Riki kept remembering, not dwelling on guilt, but honoring cost paid for every lesson learned at blade's edge. An heir reborn, as spring unfurled across Talon, painting riverbanks gold beneath cherry blossoms, the city prepared for festival days ahead. Parades winding through torchlit streets, masked dances, spilling laughter into midnight air, fireworks bursting like shattered stars above palace towers. Riki watched from palace parapets, mask pressed cool against skin, as fireworks painted silver and indigo across night sky. Symbols of power wielded openly while shadows wove their own tapestry below. He stood taller now, gaze steady, even when court intrigue threatened from all sides. Steps lighter, even while burdened by invisible scars earned in darkness none would ever see upon royal lists or family records. In those moments when doubt pressed close, as it always did before another mission began, he remembered Cassian's words. Legacy is memory carried forward, not by kings alone, but by those who dare walk unseen for sake of all who dream beneath banners bright or dark. And so did Riki embrace both what he was born to be and what he had chosen to become. An heir not merely to house Talon, but to every secret kept safe by silence, every life weighed quietly upon justice's shifting scales. Somewhere far below, courtly laughter and festival fires, the dynasty's next chapter waited, its sharpest knives honed not only by steel, but by shadows learned step by step, until dawn made all things new again. The Dynasty of Shadows. Part 6. A Mask for Every Night. The world outside the City of Lights was stirring. In spring the rivers ran quick and full with snowmelt from distant Dragonspine. Trade caravans jostled into the lower gates, filling the air with scents of spice and horses' sweat. But within the veined silver walls and hanging gardens of Talon Citadel, life continued in its own measured rhythm, each day a ritual, each night an unwritten covenant. To most, it was a city of order. To Riki, it had become a labyrinth of hidden doors, each lesson a turning deeper into shadow. The discipline of shadows. Riki's mornings began before dawn, when the palace was silent save for the whispering of servants lighting braziers. Cassian waited for him in the marble court by the moon well, where night's last mist still clung to the tiles. The training had grown more intricate, feints within feints, footwork so light it left no print on dew-damp grass. Cassian would flick a pebble, left, right, behind, and Riki learned to listen for breath and motion rather than sight or sound. They sparred with wooden daggers at first, then real ones, dulled, but still able to draw sharp pain. "You move like a noble," Cassian teased once, circling him. "But you strike like a servant who knows his master's secrets." Riki grinned, a rare thing, and answered with a sudden low sweep that nearly took the older man's feet from under him. Afterwards they would sit by the fountain, sharing bread and hard cheese as sunrise streaked the towers with gold. But training was not all. By midday, Riki attended lectures in statecraft, dry recitations of treaties and trade laws, a concession to his lineage. In these sessions, Veilen sometimes lingered at the back, inscrutable, his gaze fixed on their father's throne as if measuring its weight in his mind. Only after dusk did Riki truly come alive. With Cassian as his shadow, he slipped through servant passages behind tapestries, practiced scaling garden walls or picking ancient locks set into forbidden doors. The city became a map of challenges. Every evening brought new secrets. One evening, Cassian led him through a web of back alleys in the old quarter, the air thick with incense and laughter from lantern-lit taverns. Men and women played dice by torchlight. Thieves haggled. Whispers traded news of distant wars in Slum or new taxes imposed by the Iron Council. Here, Riki learned how to vanish in plain sight, to lace his voice with accents not his own, to become just another face in a crowd. "Your mask is not just silk and paint," Cassian told him quietly. "It is the silence where your true self waits." Tavern nights and truths unveiled. Cassian favored an inn called the Silver Finch, a place whose floors creaked with stories and whose walls remembered every secret ever uttered over ale. Here Riki found something rare: laughter, unburdened by duty. They played cards against merchants from the north, their stakes low but tempers high. Once Riki cheated outrageously, palming a card so swiftly that even Cassian missed it. When he won, a burly mercenary slammed his fist down in mock outrage. "You've a quick hand, boy. Did you learn that from your father?" Riki only smiled and passed his winnings to a beggar at the door. In these moments, amid smoke and song, he felt almost ordinary, as if destiny were something one could bargain away for another round of mead. Yet Cassian watched always, never quite relaxing. His eyes flicked to every shadow in the room, every patron whose glance lingered too long on Riki's masked face. That night, As they walked home beneath banners fluttering from lamplit balconies, Cassian spoke without looking at him. "One day you'll have to choose which mask you wear, and which you must break." Riki said nothing then, but the words nested in his chest like a blade sheathed for now. A house divided. Unbeknownst to Riki, other games played out in the palatial heights above. Veilen, the eldest son, stood before a window overlooking the city's heart. He traced patterns in the fogged glass with a fingertip. Avenues where loyal guards walked, alleys where dissent might be sown. His reflection wavered, a prince's face shifting into something colder. A knock stirred him from reverie. "Enter!" he commanded. The visitor was cloaked in gray. Lord Zigrin of House Velthar, one-time enemy of Talon, now an uneasy ally after decades of blood feuds. Zigrin's voice was soft as spider silk. "There are those beyond our walls who wish for change," Zigrin murmured. "You alone can bring it." Veilen regarded him, calculating. "My father remains strong," he said quietly. "His rule cannot simply be dismantled. There are ways to weaken even stone," Zigrin replied with a sly smile. "And as for your brothers, they could be removed from consideration." Veilen's jaw tightened imperceptibly at that, the flicker of doubt nearly invisible. "And what would you gain?" he asked. "Continuity," Zigrin lied easily. "Stability under a hand willing to act." Veilen looked out across Talon's spires once more. The city was beautiful, but beauty was fragile. He nodded, sealing an unspoken pact in the hush between them. Late that night, Veilen met again with his closest confidant, Edric, captain of an elite company known as the Iron Vigils. Edric's loyalty was absolute, but only so long as coin and cause aligned. "In 3 nights," Veilen whispered, "there will be movement at the river docks. Make sure none return to speak of it." Edric inclined his head, his eyes wary but eager for purpose. "Your command is my oath." Outside, thunder rolled distantly, the mountains answering some ancient challenge. Within Talon, storm clouds gathered unseen by those who trusted too easily in tradition's shield. Brotherhoods forged and fraying. If Riki sensed any change in the air, he saw only hints. Servants who bowed more deeply before Veilen, new faces among the palace guards, whispers that cut off when he entered a room. He confided once to Cassian as they cleaned daggers beneath star-washed trees. "Do you ever feel the ground shifting beneath us?" Cassian paused from sharpening steel. "In every castle built on legacy," he said softly, "the stones are always settling anew." He turned the blade over in his hand. "Watch your brothers closely, but not only them. Shadows gather where light is most blinding." Riki nodded, but when he looked up at the palace windows lit golden above them, he wondered how many masks each member of his family wore, and which might crack first. Night lessons. The lessons grew harsher now. Cassian set traps that stung if triggered, required Riki to move through corridors where one misstep meant failure and sometimes pain. One night, Cassian blindfolded him and spun him thrice before leading him into catacombs beneath the city, a maze of tombs and forgotten vaults echoing with water drip and distant scurrying rats. Here, Riki learned to trust more than sight or sound. He learned fearlessness, patience, and how to turn dread into focus. At last, they emerged, blinking into moonlight atop the old city wall. Cassian looked at him appraisingly, not a student, but as near equal. "You are ready for more than palace games," he said at last. "But remember, even those who walk unseen leave footprints in hearts, if not on stone." Riki met his gaze and saw pride there, a father's pride almost, but also warning. The gathering storm. Elsewhere in Talon, Edric met with Sigrun under cover of darkness in a shuttered tea house near the river. They spoke in coded phrases. The falcon tires of its perch. It seeks new sky. Gold exchanged hands. Sealed scrolls passed from cloak to cloak. Lists of those loyal to Elen, those susceptible to bribery or blackmail. A single wax-sealed letter bearing Veilen's signet made its way out along secret paths eastward, across merchant routes, and through bramble-choked forests, until it reached men whose armor bore no crest, but paid well for blood spilled quietly. The conspiracy grew roots beneath Talon's ancient foundations, deep enough that only fire or ruin might uproot them now, moments between masks. Despite whispers of unrest, life above continued. Festivals spilled color into the streets. Children darted between dancers' legs in cloud-tinted ribbons. Minstrels tuned lyres on sunlit balconies. Riki allowed himself one afternoon of unguarded joy, joining Cassian for sword dancing atop the palace roof as fireworks boomed below for some minor lordling's name day. They leapt and spun until breathless laughter ended with them sprawled side by side under endless sky. Cassian looked sidelong at him. "Do you regret any step taken so far?" Riki shook his head slowly. "I regret only what I have not yet dared." Cassian smiled, sadly this time. Courage sometimes means knowing when not to move forward. Riki pondered this as shadows lengthened toward evening, and resolved to keep watching not only enemies without, but doubts within. The spark ignites as twilight deepened one balmy night. Riki was summoned unexpectedly by his father, the High Sovereign himself. Elen sat alone in his study among drifting sheets of correspondence and half-melted candles. He gestured for Riki to sit. "I have watched you growing," Elen said, with a gravity that pressed down upon the words like stone atop a crypt. "You are quieter than your brothers, more observant." Riki tensed slightly, unsure if this was praise or accusation. "There are rumors," Elen continued softly, "that old enemies conspire anew, that gold changes hands too swiftly in our courts." He looked directly at Riki, then with eyes so dark and deep that Riki saw himself reflected there, masked, uncertain, changed forever by all he had learned since winter fell. "If danger comes for this house," Elen finished, "will you stand with me or vanish into your shadows?" Riki bowed low, not hiding from his father's gaze, but acknowledging all he had become. "I will stand where I am needed most." Elen nodded once, a pact neither fully understood nor dared speak aloud, and dismissed him into night's keeping. The broken compact, that same hour, in hidden chambers beneath Sigrun's manse, Veilen sealed another kind of promise, sworn over spilled wine and drawn steel, guaranteed by poisoned vials pressed into trembling hands and ledgers signed by men who would disappear before sunrise. "We strike within 7 nights," Sigrun whispered. "All must think it fortune or fate, not design." Veilen's mouth twisted, not quite a smile, as he agreed aloud to murder done in silence. Family blood set against family name for sake of a crown whose weight could never be shared without breaking what remained whole within him. a harmony before collapse. For Riki and Cassian, days blurred now, drills by day, shadow walking by night, laughter snatched between lessons about poisons whose names tasted foul, even when spoken only in jest. One evening, they watched distant storms gather over Dragonspine, thunderheads backlit by forked lightning that turned the world momentarily silver bright. "Do you trust your brothers?" Cassian asked quietly, almost an afterthought lost in wind sighing. Riki drew up knees to chin atop their perch on the tower's edge, thought of Veilen's cold smile and his youngest brother's bright ambition soured by envy and neglect, of secrets kept too well even among kin. "I trust," he hesitated, "that blood binds us tighter than any oath, and that ambition cuts deeper than any blade." Cassian nodded, as if this answer pleased him, and turned back toward darkness gathering below. Curtain fall. So passed days into weeks. Brotherhood weathering on borrowed time, harmony fraying beneath silk banners and festival masks, palace stones groaning under weight of plots unseen by those who walked only by daylight's grace. Riki honed each skill learned at Cassian's side, never knowing which would be needed first when thunder fell not only from distant mountains, but within halls he called home. In alleys where beggars spoke prophecy for copper coins, in halls where nobles danced while daggers waited just beyond candlelight's reach, on rooftops where youth once laughed, but now only watched. Talon's dynasty teetered between memory and promise, a shadow flickering across dawn yet to come, and all the while, invisible beneath layers woven from sorrow, loyalty, and regret, the sharpest blade hung poised above them all, ready to strike when masks fell at last, revealing what even shadow cannot hide forever. To be continued, The Dynasty of Shadows. Part 7. The Nightfall Siege. There was a hush before the storm, a silence woven from dread and distant thunder, when every lantern seemed to gutter at once, and candle flames flickered in their sconces as though the very air recoiled. In the citadel's highest chambers, Riki felt it first. Not rumor or alarm bell, but the prickle at the nape of his neck, the weight of too many unseen eyes. Cassian, ever attuned, stilled beside him, one hand ghosting toward the hilt at his belt. Far below, the city of lights held its breath. Even the magical glow in the marble towers seemed strained, as if fighting the encroaching darkness pressing up against ancient wards. Somewhere a dog bayed, then silence again. Riki and Cassian exchanged a look. Words were useless here. Years of training spoke instead in a nod, a tensed shoulder. They slipped from their perch and into shadow, gliding along secret corridors that honeycombed the palace walls. But this night, the shadows did not welcome them. They crawled with intent. The first blow, it began not with a trumpet or fanfare, but with a whisper, steel on stone, then a scream, smothered just as swiftly. The outer gates fell almost wordlessly, guards overwhelmed by figures shrouded in dusk-gray cloaks and painted masks. Smoke drifted low across courtyards already slick with blood. These were not mere brigands. They moved with the precision of men well paid and long prepared. Veilen, eldest of Talon's sons, watched it all from the shadows of his father's council chamber. The chill marble beneath his feet seemed more real than his own heartbeat. At his side stood Serene, her blade crimson already, eyes shining with cold triumph. "They will be in the upper halls within minutes," she murmured, Your father's loyalists are falling fast. Veilen flinched, just barely. Was this what victory felt like? He turned to her, voice hollow. No deaths among the family. That was the promise. Sigrun's smile was thin as a knife's edge. Fortune favors those who seize it. The labyrinth unfolds. Beneath the chaos above, Riki led Cassian through twisting side passages, the ones only he and his brothers knew from childhood games and midnight dares. Every turn brought memories, the echo of laughter now drowned beneath shouts and clashing steel. They darted past fallen servants, some still breathing, others not. In the inner courtyard, shapes moved through swirling mists, assassins conjuring illusions to confuse defenders, their blades wreathed in oil aflame with green glass fire. Alchemy stolen from distant lands. A horn sounded just once, then was cut short. Cassian hissed under his breath. They've breached the western stairs. Riki nodded grimly. We go to father. They found High Sovereign Elen already girded for war in the great hall, silver runes ablaze across his breastplate. The youngest son, a boy barely out of boyhood, clung to his side, face pale but set with stubborn fire. Elen's eyes were hard as obsidian as he spoke. Riki, take your brother and your mentor. Lead them below. Seal the eastern passages. I will hold the central keep until you return. It was not a request. Riki bowed once, already scanning exits and calculating paths in his mind. Cassian braced a hand on his shoulder, a brief, silent vow. The youngest brother started to protest. Riki silenced him with a look. Now was no time for pride. Descent into gloom. The passage to the lower vaults was narrow and choked with dust, a place of secrets and old fears. As they hurried through, Cassian lingered at each turn, scattering tiny glass vials in their wake. Too small to see, but deadly if disturbed. Poison fog, he explained tersely. If they follow. The youngest brother pressed close to Riki's side. Will father be all right? Even now, especially now, Riki felt a pang for innocence not yet lost. He'll buy us time, Riki said quietly. That's all we need. They reached the old armory, a vault carved deep into bedrock, lined with relics from wars past, spears etched with abjuration runes, mirrors that flickered with captured shadows, an axe supposedly kissed by Mars himself. Here they found the family's last defenders, half a dozen battered retainers, and Lady Thalea. Their mother, her blue and silver gown stained dark at one sleeve where fire had bitten through. She embraced her sons fiercely before turning to Cassian. What hope have we? Cassian's answer was bleak. We are outnumbered, my lady. But if we can hold here, and if Riki can clear a path, we may yet escape into the old catacombs. Thalea's lips tightened. Then do what you must. The Shadow Masters stand above them. Somewhere between ruin and memory, the battle raged hotter. Smoke and screams seeped even through thick stone. Elen stood alone before the throne room dais, sword gleaming with spell light as traitors surged through shattered doors. Veilen entered behind them, not leading, but following Sigrun's silent command. He wore no armor save for a single silver ribbon at his wrist, the mark of Talon's heir. Elen met his gaze across carnage and flame. So, Elen said softly, this is what honor means to you now? Veilen looked away. Father, it was never supposed to be. Steel flashed. Sigrun's assassins closed in. Elen fought like legend, whirling blade tracing lines of light, spells bursting on impact like miniature suns. For every man he felled, two took their place. Wounds bloomed crimson on marble tiles. Veilen watched as his father staggered beneath an onslaught meant only for kings. Wondered if this would haunt him more than any crown ever could. Sacrifice in the vaults. Below, time ran ragged. Doors shook with impacts as attackers battered at barricades hastily erected by Cassian and two loyal guards. "Can you buy me 3 minutes?" Cassian asked Riki without looking back. Riki nodded and vanished into smoke. He moved like water through cracks in stone, sliding between blades, snatching breath from throats before they could shout warning, turning his own shadow into armor. In one alcove he found an assassin hunched over a torch, readying some new horror. Riki struck swift and silent. Only cinders remained when he was done. But they kept coming. Cassian threw a final glance at Riki, then spun to face Lady Thalea and her youngest. "Get behind me!" With a flick of his wrist he shattered 2 vials at his feet. Acrid clouds billowed forth, filling the passage with choking haze that left attackers gagging or blind. Riki danced amid them, a blur of indigo steel and masked resolve, each motion honed by pain and purpose. One blade grazed his arm. He ignored it. Instead, he watched as an arrow arced from above, aimed directly for his mother. Cassian dove into its path, taking it through chest and shoulder instead. He staggered, met Riki's gaze, and managed a strained smile. Lesson: never trust an open corridor. By then, Riki was moving, dragging Cassian back even as defenders closed ranks around Lady Thalea and her youngest son. Collapse. The eastern wall shuddered, dust raining down as explosives set by Sigrun's saboteurs bit stone apart. A breach yawned open. Enemies poured through like floodwater. Riki pressed Cassian against the great vault door, ripped cloth from his own tunic to stanch blood that would not stop flowing. Cassian's breath rattled, shallow but defiant. "Go! Get them out! I'll slow them. One last lesson." "I won't leave you," Riki snarled, but Cassian's hand clamped hard on his arm. "You must." Eyes fierce even as life ebbed away. "Remember what I taught you. Sometimes survival is vengeance enough." He fumbled at his belt, pushing a tiny silver locket into Riki's palm. "For when you forget who you are." Then Cassian was up, staggering toward advancing foes with nothing left but stubbornness and a half-spoken curse on his lips. "Come on, then, face me." He fell beneath their blades, but not before dropping 2 final vials that filled the breach with flames blue as regret. The family entrapped. There was no time for grief or words. Riki gathered what remained of his family, his shaken mother, his youngest brother, half mad with fear, and forced them down an auxiliary passage only he had ever remembered from childhood maps. Behind them echoed screams and thunderous collapse. Somewhere far above, the citadel groaned as if mourning its own undoing. At last, they reached a sub-basement, air stale, yet untouched by battle above. Here, ancient magic lingered, wards so old even Elen barely recalled their purpose. The great iron door slammed shut behind them, locking darkness in and everything else out. Lady Thalea slumped against cool stone, clutching her youngest son close. Riki pressed hand to wall, fighting for calm as echoes faded into silence, broken only by ragged breath. "We wait," he whispered, more prayer than command now. And we do not forget, up above, the false dawn, in ruined halls, Veilen stood amid ashes and silence, the battered crown at his feet, Sigrun at his side, smirking as dawn crept bloody over shattered towers. The fires were dying now, but so too was any illusion he'd had of clemency or peace. "The city is yours," Sigrun purred, "all debts paid." Veilen knelt to gather up crown and memory both, and in that moment knew what every king must learn too late. That thrones bought with betrayal are always thrones of bone. A shadow remains. Beneath it all, in darkness thick as oil, Riki sat with back against locked iron, mother asleep on his shoulder, brother finally quiet after hours of weeping. He closed eyes heavy with exhaustion and remembered every lesson Cassian ever taught him. How to wait, how to listen, how to become unseen, even in places no light could reach. Above, Talon burned. Below, its last heirs endured in darkness, as always. The sharpest blade waited for its hour. To be continued, the Dynasty of Shadows. Part 8. Ashes in the Vault. They waited in the darkness, breath shallow, as if frightened that even the stirring of air within their lungs might betray them. The sub-basement was ancient, older than the dynasty's banners, older, perhaps, than even the first stones of Talon's fabled City of Lights. Here, the world outside pressed in only as muffled tremors and the distant shuddering thunder of war. A line of dim witchlight crawled along the ceiling, a final, flickering ward, casting blue shadows across Riki's face as he crouched by the iron door. Lady Thalea was a pale wraith of grief, cradling her youngest son, who had finally slipped into a tormented sleep. In that silence, time stretched thin and brittle, but the enemy had not forgotten them. A jolt, barely perceptible at first, ran through the stone floor. Riki rose, every muscle tensed. He pressed a palm to the wall, feeling a vibration. Heavy boots, the clatter of arms, muffled voices echoing through the vent shafts. The last defenders of Talon were dying above, and now the hunt turned below. Riki turned to his mother. "They're coming," he whispered. Thalea's eyes, sunken with exhaustion and loss, met his. "We can't run, not with him." Her gaze flicked to her youngest son. "We hold here," Riki said. He drew his blades, slender, curved, gleaming faintly in the blue gloom. "Cassian would have—" Her voice broke. "Cassian taught me for this." Riki forced a grim smile. "Let them come." He did not add, "Let them pay for every drop of our blood." The first breach. It began with a thunderous blow against the iron door, then another, relentless as a war drum. Dust rained. Fragments of old spells sparked and fizzled in protest. Riki motioned his family back, wedging them behind the broken remnants of an ancient sarcophagus. He pressed himself into darkness. The door buckled with a shriek, then crashed open. Light from above stabbed the vault. Torches and witch lamps held high by armored mercenaries, faces masked in crimson cloth, bearing Sigrun's sigil. "Spread out!" barked their captain, a brute with an axe and a voice rough as gravel. 6 men entered before the first fell. Riki dropped from the ceiling shadow, dagger flashing, throat slit before any could shout. He vanished in smoke as another turned, blade finding ribs, leaving only a gasp. Chaos erupted. A flash of blue powder filled the chamber, blinding and choking. Screams rang out as warriors clawed at their faces. Shadows flickered and danced with death. "Where is he?" bellowed the captain, a soft whisper behind him. Here. Steel slid between vertebrae. Riki's cold precision born of all those secret midnight lessons. The captain collapsed, sightless eyes, staring at nothing. In moments, the vault was silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the survivors and the whimpers of those dying slow in poison mist. But more footsteps thundered on stone above. Descent into madness. The second wave came swiftly, mercenaries and traitor guards alike, hurling fire pots and hacking blindly at shadows. Riki darted, slipping between columns, scattering glass vials that erupted into choking smoke or spattered oil across marble floors. One assailant caught a glimpse, a flicker of blue scarf, and lunged with spear extended. Riki twisted aside. The shaft glanced off his pauldron as he countered with a thrust to the thigh, then a cut through tendons at the knee. The man collapsed, shrieking. Another fell to a thrown blade, eyes wide with terror. But it was not enough. Their numbers pressed in, a tide of steel and hate. At last, they found Lady Thalia and her youngest son cowering behind granite. Sigrun herself strode into view now, tall, armored in blackened mail, her red plaited hair wild with victory. Well, she sneered, surveying the carnage, the rats have bite. Her sword leveled at Thalia's throat. Where is Veilen? Where is your precious heir? Thalia spat blood at Sigrun's feet. Rot with your wolves in hell. Sigrun's eyes narrowed, her blade rose, and Riki crashed into her from above, both knives bared. They tumbled across stone, sparks flew as steel met steel. Sigrun snarled curses strong as any man, but Riki was quicker, a shadow in motion, every step taught by Cassian's ghost. They traded blows, Sigrun's strength against Riki's speed and cunning. Twice she nearly caught him. Twice he slipped free in bursts of smoke or with impossible contortions. But for every foe he felled, 3 took their place. The last stand. Blood slicked Riki's hands. His breath burned in his chest. He heard Thalia scream, the sharp cry of a mother losing everything, and spun to see her dragged upright by 2 mercenaries as Sigrun pressed her sword to the woman's heart. "Yield!" Sigrun roared to Riki above the din. He hesitated, a heartbeat too long. 2 blades sliced his back as enemies swarmed him. He staggered to one knee but whirled in desperation, flinging a smoke bomb that swallowed half the vault in stinging gray fog. Chaos, coughing shouts, steel striking stone, bodies trampled underfoot. Riki crawled to his family, the world spinning, everything muffled save for his mother's voice. "Go, run, save yourself. I won't leave you," he choked. A great crash. A spear hurled by Sigrun smashed marble inches from his head, showering them in dust. The youngest brother screamed, a wordless sound of terror, as another mercenary seized him by the hair and dragged him bodily into torchlight. Lady Thalia fought like a cornered wolf, scratching, biting, but a mailed fist crashed across her face. Blood sprayed. She sagged. Riki lunged, blades whirling, but a crossbow bolt caught him in the side. He fell hard, gasping for breath. Through swirling smoke and flame, he heard Sigrun's cruel laughter. "End it," she commanded her men. A family's end. It happened quickly then, a blur of motion and screams. Thalia was stabbed through the chest, her youngest son strangled as he kicked helplessly at armored legs. Riki clawed forward on bloody hands, tried to rise, but another boot crashed down on his arm, pinning him. Someone spat on him, another cursed his name. Sigrun knelt beside him, a wolfish smile on her lips. "So much for Talon," she sneered. She drove her dagger into his shoulder, not quite fatal, but deep enough to set his world spinning anew. "Leave him," she commanded her men finally, rising to survey her work. "Let him see what becomes of traitors' spawn." They filed out, dragging torches and wounded behind them. The vault door slammed shut once more. Darkness rushed in like cold water. A brother's farewell. Riki drifted in agony, half conscious, until a ragged sob jolted him awake. Not his own voice, another's. He rolled painfully onto his side and saw Veilen lying by a ruined column, blood streaming from 3 mortal wounds beneath shattered armor. His face was deathly pale, eyes wide with shock and pain. Veilen coughed, a wet, rattling sound, as Riki dragged himself to his side. "Brother," Riki croaked. Veilen reached for him blindly. Their fingers found each other amid ruins and blood. "I never thought it would end this way," Veilen whispered through a crimson foam. His crown lay bent beside him, a mockery of rule. "You betrayed us," Riki said quietly. Not accusation now, just testimony given to dying air. Veilen winced. Tears mingled with blood on his cheeks. "I wanted to save us, but instead..." His voice broke into shallow gasps. Riki wept then, silent tears burning tracks through soot and blood. Whatever love remained between them was twisted by history's blade, but still it clung stubbornly at the edge of death's cold shadow. With trembling hands, Veilen pressed something into Riki's palm, an old signet ring, the sigil of their house, half shadow and half sun upon silver stars. "Promise me," Veilen rasped. "Do not let this be our end. Avenge them. Make Talon feared again, even if only as a whisper." "I swear it," Riki said, not aloud but deeper than words, as Veilen's eyes glazed over, fixed forever on ruins he himself had helped bring down. Ashes and shadows. Time lost meaning in that vault. Only pain remained. Smoke thinned slowly. Scattered rays from broken wards illuminated devastation. Bodies sprawled in grotesque tableau. Mother, brother, kin, all gone now to whatever gods watched such ruin from afar. Riki bound his wounds clumsily, pushed away tears, until nothing remained but iron resolve and hate that glowed like coals under frost. He gathered what little he could, blades, bombs, Cassian's silver locket, the signet ring now cold against his breastbone. At last he knelt before each fallen member of his family in turn, touching brow to cold skin in final farewell, and then moved to Veilen's corpse one final time. "You will be avenged," he vowed to all of them, to every shattered mask upon cracked marble, to every ancestor whose hopes had ended in fire and blood this night. He pressed a last smoke bomb to the vault's far wall, ignited it, and used its cover to pry open a half-collapsed vent shaft known only from childhood games. Wounded and broken, but undeterred, Riki slipped into darkness, deeper still, the last air now only a shadow among ashes. Above Talon's bones, dawn crept cold and uncaring, but somewhere far below, single spark still burned, to be continued.